microphone on, that helps a whole lot.
You can turn them off.
Can't turn, yeah, the ones down there you can't, but this one,
You can't?
no. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the quarterly meeting of the Lincoln Safe and Successful Kids Interlocal Board. I'd like to draw your attention to the Open Meetings Act, which is posted by the exit in the northwest corner of our room. I'd also like to take a moment to talk about how our board is constructed. We have a couple of new members joining us from the school board. Don Mayhew and Connie Duncan are new representatives from the LPS board. And I'm not sure if this is your second meeting, Richard, as city council. So we have a healthy new board and we're moving forward. Thank you all for joining us. And I'd also like to say thank you to Lanny Boswell and Barb Byer for their service to the board. Their terms ended, but I'd like to say I appreciate their contributions, and they will be missed. The next thing we need to do, and we have a very healthy agenda, and I'm going to work my way through it. Item number 2 is roll call, so we can get our members present and establish a quorum so we can host this meeting. Angie, would you help us with that, please?
You bet. Kathy Danick? Here. Connie Duncan?
Here.
Don Mayhew?
Present.
Richard McGinnis?
Here.
Leary and Gaylor Baird? Benny Shope?
Here. Push the little.
Thank you. Thank you. Ours never does
Thank you, Angie. I think we do have enough for a quorum. The next item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from our March. You guys remember March? That was a long time ago. March 2020 meeting. I'd like to have a motion for approval of those minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion by Board Member McGinnis and a second by Board Member Mayhew. Is there any discussion of the minutes from our March meeting? Hearing no discussion, I would like a vote. Angie, would you call the roll for that, please? Approval of the minutes.
Kathy Danick?
Yes.
Connie Duncan?
Yes.
Don Mayhew?
Yes.
Richard McGinnis?
Yes.
Benny Shope?
Yes.
Motion carried.
We're good? Yep. All right, thank you. I was reading ahead on the agenda. Next on our agenda, item number 4 is public comment. And this is where this board kind of differs a little bit from our city council board. This is for public comment if you would like to speak about anything not currently listed on our agenda. Is there anyone in the audience or the chamber that would like to make public comment on anything not on the agenda? We'll do a long pause and wait for people. 3, 2, 1. Seeing no one, I think we'll close the public comment portion of our program. And we'll go into item number 5. A continued public hearing and approval of the proposed Safe and Successful Kids Interlocal Budget for fiscal year 2021. And who will, but before we move forward, Denise, would you like to come up and help us with this? I'm a little worried about our last public meeting.
Okay,
So do we need to, the rule suspension thing?
we'll do that a little bit later.
Okay.
Later on, if that's okay with you.
That's okay with me.
Okay, and we've got the budget document pulled up. Good afternoon. My name is Denise Pierce, and my document disappeared.
Ms. Pierce, if you will drag the microphone a little bit more in front of you.
Thank you.
There we go.
Much better. My name is Denise Pierce. I am with the Lincoln Parks and Recreation Department. This afternoon, myself, along with Dr. John Neal and Nola Derby Bennett, we will be tag teaming this budget presentation for you. I cannot figure out why it doesn't want to stay up here for me. This is going to be, for those of you who were on the board in March, this is going to be very similar to what you heard in March, which, as the chair noted, really does seem like an awfully long time ago. Just a reminder that the interlocal agreement itself sets up those 3 primary areas for funding. One is the protective funding, or the protective programming. Those are the 6 SROs in our middle schools, as well as the threat assessment officer. And on the budget document that you have in front of you, that will be the blue area that you see there. The second area of funding is what we called preventive programming. That is the mental health funding. You're actually going to get an annual report on that a little bit later in the meeting. That then is going to be on the orange area of the budget document that you have in front of you. Last then is that proactive programming. That's our CLC funding. That's what Nola's going to talk to you about in a few moments here, and that is going to be in the green area there on the second page of your budget sheet. So the interlocal agreement itself sets forth both the formula and also the framework for putting together a budget. Basically, LPS and the city, they each decide what their contribution is going to be for that interlocal funding. Those two amounts are then added together, and then what we do is we deduct the city's CLC costs from that number to come up with what's called the net program funding. And that net program funding is an important number because there's also language in the interlocal agreement that says no more than 30% of that net program funding can be allocated towards officer expenses, and at least 40% of that net program funding needs to go towards CLC funding or CLC programming. There isn't anything in the interlocal agreement regarding a ceiling or a floor for that last element of programming, the mental health funding. So let's see if we can keep this budget document up. Otherwise, I might need Jamie's assistance here as we walk through this framework. If you go over to the far right-hand column, you'll see the FY 2021 proposed budget for the interlocal. You'll see at the very top that staff continues to, oh, goodness gracious, I'm sorry. That staff continues to recommend that each side, the city and LPS, put in that $1.092 million. Again, we add those two figures together. That comes up with a $2.184 million. We deduct the city's CLC expenses. That number is a calculation that's also governed by the interlocal agreement. We deduct that number. We come up with the $1.647 million in change there. That's the net program funding that I mentioned earlier. Then we move down into the blue area of our spreadsheet, which again is where we're going to talk about the law enforcement officers. So as I think we all know from the school board's meeting earlier this week, we do have a separate agreement between the city and LPS that sets that per officer rate for the fiscal year, which also happens to be essentially the school year. So what you'll see here then is this is the city's share of that per officer rate. That separate agreement between the two entities indicate the city will pay for part of the officers and the school district will pay for the part of the officers. So this represents, that $72,000 represents the city's share of that threat assessment officer. Moving down then to the next line, we have those 6 middle school officers. Again, not high school officers are represented here, just those 6 middle school officers. And again, this is the city's share of that amount. When you add those two numbers together, you come up with the total of the $504,010. But again, as we mentioned earlier, we can spend no more than 30% of that net program funding on officers. When you multiply 30% times that net program funding, you come up with the $494,206 that you see on the bottom right-hand part of the blue area of your budget document. So that outlines the general as well as the officer portion of the budget. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to John Knoll to talk about CLC and also mental health funding.
Are we allowed to ask questions now, or do we wait?
I think, well, let's ask questions now. Do you have, Ms.
I just-
Pierce?
I'm sorry, I
Ms.
just had a
Mays,
quick
Let's do
one.
that right now while it's
Sure.
fresh in our brain.
The 30%, what is that? What number are you multiplying that by?
The 30% is applied against that net program funding. So if you take 30% times that $1.647 million,
That.
you're going to get that $494,206 cap that you see.
So the 494,206 is the most that can be spent on the officers?
That's the most that the city can count towards its interlocal contribution.
But if we were adding up the numbers above, it comes to 504, so where does that other 10? It's just
That's
going
the
to be
cost that the city will
underfunded?
have to continue to bear, but we can't count those additional costs towards the city's contribution to the SSK initiative.
I see. All right, thank you.
Okay. And John, maybe you'll have better luck keeping this up.
I'll do my best. I'll do my best. Thank you, Denise. I'm just going to speak briefly on the mental health part of the budget.
as it is also part of our presentation later this afternoon. I'm going to try again. There we go. And we're looking at the orange section. And I'd just like to highlight that it includes.
John, we're getting some technical assistance in the back.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to try something real quick. Sorry, John.
No. Thank you.
This is the document, right?
Yep.
It's opening with Acrobat Pro. Let's try it with just the reader, and I think we'll have better luck with it.
Jump to the orange one.
I'm sorry. It should stay up a little better that way. Sorry about that.
Jamie, thank you very much. I'd like to first identify that one of the most critical aspects of the funding for the mental health is Alison Hendrick, who is the safety social worker. She coordinates with the rest of our threat assessment team to better understand the risk factors at play with the students and families involved in a threat assessment situation. And she helps bring the resources to those students and families. Most often when an issue is a threat assessment issue that has to be addressed, it is not something that is adjudicated or an arrest takes place, but finding the right resources to put in place to mitigate the risk so it does not continue. You'll hear more of that in the presentation. But along with the social worker, there are also contracted services through Blue Valley Family Services and Hope Spoke to provide direct therapy in schools to just about 300 students with about a little over 3,000 hours of service, including the support from threat assessment, direct therapy, and youth assistance programs. And again, Russ Ewing, our Director of Student Services, and Alison Hendrick will be along later to give you the annual report and provide much more detail to that part of the budget. You'll note it continues to be 26% of the budget. It is the one part of the budget that's not identified in our bylaws for how it should be addressed. It's the part that's left over after the other two parts of the budget are set. You'll see that with the 26% of a slightly larger amount, it increases the amount of therapy services that we'll be able to provide. With that, I'd like to pass things along to Nola Derby-Bennett, who's the director of our Community Learning Center programs. She'll talk about that aspect of the budget.
Good afternoon. So the next section then will be the green section that we'll be looking at, which is the proactive programming, which is the funding that comes to the community learning centers. And as part of the Safe and Successful Kids Interlocal Agreement, that no less than 40% of the overall budget can be allocated to the community learning centers. So the top line item there, the Community Learning Centers Initiative Leadership Staff, I'll just give you a little breakdown of where those dollars go, who they go to support within our office. It goes to support our data secretary, which is somebody who helps to capture all of the different data pieces that we report to NDE, Nebraska Department of Education, as well as a lot of our different funders. And then it pays for the salary of our family and neighborhood engagement specialist, which is a position that we were able to add to our initiative when this funding was approved initially. It also does help to pay the salary of our evaluator through ESU 18, and so we're able to capture a lot of really great quantitative and qualitative data about the work that the CLCs are doing and the impact that we're having on the community. And then there's also some funding in that category for staff development as well as public information. So being able to take all of the data and evaluation pieces that we capture and then communicate them out to the community. And then the next sections, the Community Learning Center programming section, and then there's a line item specific to STEAM programming. That is all the funding that we are able to use to help enhance the academic and enrichment programming at our 29 CLC sites. And so the STEAM programming, if you take that number, 145,000, and divide it by 29 sites, you'll see that there's $5,000 earmarked for each site. for specific to STEAM programming. And so what we've done over the last 2 years is ask our sites all to look at their current programming and then add additional STEAM programming to help to enhance that science, technology, engineering, arts, and math is what STEAM stands for. And so we've asked them to add new programming in one of those 5 areas with that $5,000, and then the other $268,000 is able to be applied for through any of our sites to either enhance programming that they currently have going on or add new programming and new partners at any of those sites. What we've seen them use those funds for over the last couple of years is bringing in additional outside partners, experts in their respective fields in the community to provide programming for our students, as well as enhance their AM programming, their morning programming, and their summer programming. So the funding that we have, the 21st century funding that we have from Nebraska Department of Education does not allow for those 21st century dollars to be used for AM or summer programming. And so this has been a nice ability for us to enhance the programming that we're able to offer for our students during those periods of time. And then the last line item there is $60,000, which is earmarked for kind of a variety of different things. Scholarships, family learning support, and services are the 2 main areas that we use those for. And I just pulled some numbers from that I captured from between March, when school shut down, and the end of the summer. And just during that period of time alone, we granted almost $23,000 in scholarships for students to be able to participate in person at a few of our sites that were offering in-person programming during that shutdown time. So what we were hearing from families was, we had budgeted for our regular before and after school childcare fee. Now we have a full day fee that we're having to figure out. And so we were able to help make up the difference for those families. And so that's a piece of the scholarships that I just wanted to highlight because we were able to really repurpose those funds from what we had originally anticipated their scholarships looking like over the summer, and add additional funding for families to be able to, for those folks who are still going to work, to have a good place for their students to go every day in person, be supported through their remote learning in the 4th quarter, and then participate in summer school virtually during the summer. So those are the different kind of areas that we've broken down the CLC programming, and the total there is $716,580.
Thank you, Ms. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't want anybody to think we run 26 CLC, $716,000.
No.
So, and I know that we have had some significant success in getting some rather large continuing grants because of this partnership between the City of Lincoln and Lincoln Public Schools to create this initiative with the SSK. Can you talk a little bit about what the broad funding is, without giving me a finite number, because I know you can't, because a lot of it is in kind, but as close as you can.
Right, absolutely. So in your packets, you actually have the CLC 2021 budget. I realize it's in very, very small print. But this was the budget that was approved at the August 13th CLC Board of Directors meeting. And this upcoming year, our budget is, just a little north of $8.6 million. And so we take into account in that budget all of the funds that run through our office through different grant sources and different funding sources that we have, as well as we do capture the operating budgets of our 29 sites and the funding that those 10 CLC lead agency partners are able to leverage to help to support their sites as well. And thank you for mentioning being able to leverage this partnership in these in these dollars into additional funds. Last year, we did receive a $385,000 grant from the Sherwood Foundation. I'm just wrapping up paperwork actually today and tomorrow to, you know, it's not a reapply, it's just an informational report to the Sherwood Foundation with the anticipation that they will renew that grant to us again at the $385,000 level for the upcoming school year. So that's one of the funding sources that we've been able to leverage, and they've been very impressed with this partnership and the agreements that have been made between the city and the school district.
I just wanted to say thank you, because where I live, you're in every one of my schools.
Yep.
And every kid that I know that uses the CLCs are phenomenally happy with it, and as are their parents. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Okay, so I did a very bad job of being the chair and moderator. I see there are two other people that would like to speak. I'm going to go, actually, everybody wants. Ms. Duncan first, and then we'll go to Mr. McGinnis, and then we'll come to Mr. Mayhew. Ms. Duncan.
Tell me, your funders outside of the city, are they happy
Thank
with
you.
the entire agreement that we've made with the city? Have you ever had any complaints where one of your funders said, well, if you take this out of this interlocal, I will fund you? Have you had anything like that?
I haven't had anybody express any concerns about any piece of the agreement. I will say that Sherwood did request a copy of the agreement or access to the agreement, which I shared with them. It's made public on the website. And they were interested in approaching other communities about creating similar relationships between the city and the school district in order to fully fund their full-service community schools.
Well, that really says a lot for our largest funder in the state of Nebraska to say that they're very happy with all three pieces of an interlocal agreement. It says a lot to me.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Great.
Mr. McGinnis.
Oh, I really wasn't going to say much, but I was just going to ask about the 21st Century Grant. That's still active?
It is still
Although,
active.
I mean, a year ago, we were worried about it.
Yep, we actually have already heard for the upcoming year that they aren't accepting any applications for new sites. So they'll only be looking at renewal sites for the 21-22 school year. But they're, you know, those funds can continue to be supported through Congress. They continue to be added back to the federal budget. And so we are moving forward as if those funds are going to continue.
Okay, thank you.
Yay. Mr. Mayhew.
With apologies to my colleagues, it was my intention to ask these questions offline, but seeing as this is an action item, there are a couple of things I need to understand before we take the vote. And I'm not sure who needs to respond to these, but going back to the first page, the pulling out the CLC funds from the overall amount, the reason we do that is because those are funds that come from the city's general fund, and then they get credited here with those expenditures.
I will let Denise answer that question.
You're talking about the 536 from the
Mr. Mayhew, the
16.
reason we do that is the
Exists.
interlocal agreement tells us that's what we do. There's language in the interlocal agreement that tells us how much the city's CLC expenses can go up every year. You'll see it went down actually because we are no longer providing service, I believe, at Goodrich.
That was my next question.
So that's why the city's number went down, and we do that because that's the formula that's set forth in the interlocal agreement.
Sure, and again, these are funds that come out of the city's general fund?
Yes,
Okay, and here you're just getting credited against this.
right.
Got it. On the last page then, there are, first of all, a couple of things. In the middle, there's the budget to actual from 18 to 19. It looks like we underspent by $136,000. Where is that reflected in, how is that reconciled for the next year's budget? Where'd that money go?
The short version is we have not yet figured out the reconciliation process. John and I have been having ongoing conversations with folks within the city and LPS on that issue.
Okay, I'm
So
just trying to figure out the ramifications of that based on our vote to approve the budget today.
It won't impact this budget. We'll handle that separately.
Okay, fair enough. And then in the last frame, the 2021 proposed, so I see on the front, the math, each entity is chipping in 1092, and that gives us a total of 2184, and then of that 2184, on this last page, that's how it gets split out. Can you help me understand, I assume there are some adjustments going on, can you help me understand why it would, one body over the other would then get an adjustment on this final page that would change it from being equal contributions?
Is that the 30% problem?
Well, no, see, what I'm saying is that the LPS, on the very last page, under 2021, the
115.
LPS version is 1153148, and the
Yes.
city is 1030852. In very general terms, why aren't those numbers the same?
The budget reflects the commitments of both sides to provide an equal amount, but when you look at where the funds have to be, where the funding has to be expended, because of where the program sits, whether the program sits with the city or the program sits with the LPS, where it has to actually be expended because it's coming not from the SSK budget, but because it's coming from the budget of the city or from LPS, it gets expended in an unequal amount because of that, because of the programming budget. And so the city and LPS have to figure out how to then rebalance those amounts so that it continues to be an equal commitment to the project.
So again, we're talking some type of reconciliation
Right.
process.
Exactly, yeah.
And the answer to that question is the same one as before. We still haven't quite figured that one out yet.
That's right.
So we're approving this budget with the idea that at some point, these numbers are going to be made square, but we don't know what that's going to look like yet.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions from, we're actually still in Ms. Bennett's
All right, I got
presentation.
another one.
Yes.
So I'm
Is this a
Sorry?
question for Ms. Bennett or a question about the budget?
budget.
Okay, Ms. Bennett,
So
thank you very
I'm
much.
with Dawn on this. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around it. So very last page, city had additional cost of $40,892 for first year of SRO training costs. Is that where this difference is? I'm confused too.
That will account for part of the difference in the first year, and that's part of what we'll also have to address in the reconciliation process.
Okay.
Are there other questions? So I do have, just this is thrown out there, so the numbers don't match up right now. There'll be some reconciliation. Do we have any timeline on when we might know that? Have you guys, we'd like to be done by December 31st or as soon as the first snowfall or something like?
I will say we were working on it pre-COVID, and we're hopeful to get it done in the next couple of months here, because we would like to have this issue resolved before we come forward to this board with the next budget, which is quickly approaching. That'll be in March, where we come before you for the first budget reading, or the first hearing on the budget.
So, and I'm sorry, Denise, before you sit down, so will there need to be adjustments made to our current budget to make up for these differences, or?
We wouldn't need an adjustment to the budget, no.
The question is not the budget itself, because each party commits the same amount. The problem is what actually gets spent out in projects weighs more heavily sometimes on the city or on LPS side. So once we figure out where the expenses go, then it's just a reconciliation process. But it doesn't change how we project out how we fund each of the programs.
Okay. Other questions? Mr. Mayhew?
I'm so sorry, but if we underspent by 136,000, then couldn't that potentially mean that we could lower this year's budget by 136,000?
But the funding that is not spent here stays in the general fund of either the city or LPS to then determine how to use that funding in other areas within their budget. Our budget is not the budget from which it's spent. We make a commitment of how we think the money should be spent, make a recommendation to we'll make a recommendation to the LPS board, city makes a recommendation to the city council of how those funds should be spent.
But this is not really our money. We're just suggesting how you spend your money for us.
Right. It's our commitment towards these programs as distinguished from a standalone budget that this body controls. We're making a recommendation back to our existing bodies, the city council and the Board of Education, on how the general fund should be aligned to match this commitment together.
Ms. Danica, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayhew wants to follow up.
It's not really a question, it's an observation. So basically, we spent $136,000 less than we appropriated or allocated, correct?
Correct.
And we're just not sure exactly where that was, or we kind of know where it was?
We had, no, in 1819, one of the areas that especially you can note on the inside, if you look back, please look at the orange section. If you look at the orange section, you'll notice an underspent in the orange because as we ramped up the mental health services, as you ramp those up, They weren't available right at the start of the year. The program was just approved, so we had to hire our social worker, get our contracts in place. So the first third of the year, we weren't able to offer those services. Once we were able to ramp them up, we can only ramp them up to the capacity that we could maintain. So we couldn't recollect and reuse those dollars that were here for therapy, because you would start therapeutic services for students that when you started the next year, you couldn't continue. So we had the ability to maintain about those 300 students. We brought it up to that number and moved forward with the rest of the year, but we couldn't go back and recoup and use those services in another way. That's part of that funding. But as we start this year, we are starting at the beginning of the year. We are ramped up to full speed at the start of the school year.
So there is going to be that full amount available for the students we
Correct.
serve this year.
And that's why we haven't adjusted the budget, because we're now up to the capacity to fully utilize the money we had budgeted in the past.
Mr. Mayhew had a follow-up question.
Okay, I think I'm actually asking the same thing. So just to be clear, then, this body doesn't appropriate or collect funds. This is largely just accounting to show how the city and LPS spent that money out of their general fund budgets. And I think you just answered this, but just to be clear, that $136,000, while that was not spent, that is still allocated or committed to SSK-related expenditures,
Right, so
correct?
for long-term, it stays in that commitment so that we can keep, so that using the mental health service as an example, we can continue to work at the capacity that was our original commitment.
Okay, good, thank you.
Other questions?
I have one more.
Yes. Ms.
But
Duncan,
since
please.
we have a touch left, we have had discussions about increasing mental health. Is that correct?
But that would be done then through whatever funds remain for either the city or for LPS within their budget to determine how to use those funds that then are not spent. And that will be part of the reconciliation process, is how to account for that between the two bodies.
Wonderful. That's really good.
That's a little clearer, thank you.
The last piece that I just want to mention is the Clc Non-Profit Board that was also put together as a part of the SSK initiative a couple years ago. Part of their role is to review the budget before it comes to your body. They did so this spring. They were actually able to do that right after COVID started, and they did recommend approval.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Do you guys have any additional presentation for us? Is there a wrap-up or?
I think that's it, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So we're done with the budget presentation, and this is the part I'm sure I'm going to screw up.
You'll do just fine.
Yeah. So we would have had a public hearing on this earlier in the year, but due to COVID, we did not. We'd like to continue that public hearing this time, but in order to do that, we need to do some rule adjustment. We need to suspend our rules briefly so we can go back to public hearing that we should have had early in the year. At this point, I'd like to entertain a motion to suspend our rules.
I would make a motion to suspend our rules.
Second?
Have a motion by Ms. Danick and a second by Mr. McGinnis to suspend our rules so we can have a public hearing. Is there any discussion of that motion?
I just want to clarify. So
Yes,
the
Ms.
public hearing, I believe it was continued to this date.
Continued, yes.
Right. And so and there was a requirement under the rules of governance to approve the budget back in April, but we didn't have an April meeting
Right.
because of COVID. And so we're approving it. We're suspending the rules also with regard to that to vote on the budget today here in August.
Thank you, Ms. Golden. So,
Angela's got all that, right?
Ms. Golden, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Is everybody clear on that? I'm clear, or are we all good? So we need a roll call vote now, please.
Okay. Kathy Danick,
Yes.
Connie Duncan,
Yes?
Don Mayhew,
Yes.
Richard McGinnis,
Yes.
Benny Shope.
Yes.
Rules are suspended.
Okay. So we'll now have public hearing. Is there anyone that would like to speak on the interlocal budget for 2021? Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me do that differently. We have people that have signed in, and Ms. Chestnut's going to call them forward. That way we can socially distance and everybody can remain safe.
Okay.
Angela, help me here.
I actually have 4 that have signed in. There is a 5-minute time limit for each speaker. I have a timer, I'll be timing. I'm going to call in order from what you signed in, I'm going to call your name and have you come forward. When I call that name, I'll also read the next name on the list to let you know you're on deck, so that we don't have to delay between people. So,
Before you go forward, that, are we comfortable using 2 microphones? Is there enough social distance between the microphones to have the on-deck person already waiting at the next microphone? Does everybody feel okay with that? If you feel comfortable doing that,
sure,
please consider that. That'll be a time saving for all of us.
okay.
I do have a quick question, just because I have never done this with you. I know when we have our meetings, we do not respond to public comment. I realize we do have a couple teachers here, and I want to make sure they get out in time to get back to school. Do we comment? What is your policy?
Our policy with the city council is that it's a chance for the public to tell us, and we digest, and we do not respond or act at this point. We take those comments, we group later together and talk about that, and then make that part of our decision-making process.
Good. We can get our teachers back. Perfect.
So having said that, would you please call the first testifier?
Okay. The first person is Kelly Seacrest, and on deck is Serena Freet. And if you could,
Either one.
I think either one.
if you could state your name, please, and state and spell your name and then your address.
Yes, my name is Kelly Seacrest, Kelly Seacrest. I live in Lincoln.
Ms. Seacrest, welcome.
Thank you. Do I have my 5 minutes starts?
Now.
Thank you. It is quite frankly perverse, offensive, and illogical to tie CLC funding with police. The police cause harm, as outlined in the recent LPS SRO report. It causes harm to Black and Indigenous and disabled and students with disabilities and low-income students. So there are complaints about this interlocal agreement. It might not be coming from places and institutions and organizations that have funded this, but it is coming from the community, students, parents, and teachers and staff. Has anyone been listening to those voices? Maybe you're all tuning out many of those voices that have been giving testimony on how harmful the police are, whether here at the school, here at City Council, the school board, or across the nation. I would say this whole process, this agreement, this meeting, it's purposely inaccessible for the community to participate in. There are many, many more people who would be here if they could, but this is in the middle of the day. Students are at school, their families are at work, and teachers are, of course, also at work. There are many, countless issues. I could speak for hours about the serious flaws, contradictions, and harms that the police, the SRO program, will cause. They have been outlined. They are everywhere. I don't understand why you're not listening. I'll just briefly speak of a few of them. Police officers are not mental health professionals. They cannot respond adequately to mental health crises. There are many more. We are in the midst of a human rights movement for Black lives. Are you paying attention to what is happening across the country? We're also in the middle of a pandemic. The district has forced staff and students back to work without adequate time, funding, and support. Students are traumatized and facing evictions and family job loss. Think of the money that you're spending on SROs and think about where that could go and what good that could do for students and for the people who work in schools. You are spending $500,000 on police in schools when there is no evidence that they serve the purpose of which they are there. There is no evidence that they make schools safer. There is no evidence that they stop school shootings. One of the biggest parts in the report, the serious incidents, is vandalism, graffiti. That's what police are there for. There's a cheaper way to prevent from that happening. You provide murals and art opportunities through the CLC program. The CLC program is an incredible space, program, and place for students and staff to collaborate with the community. I have been a teacher with LPS for over 8 years. The CLC program changed my life, and it changes many students' lives. You could not put a limit on how valuable this program is. And tying it with something that causes harm, I have no words. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Seacrest. Please, let's hold the outburst down and be a little civil with everybody in the room.
Next up is Serena Freet. On deck, Corey Raymond.
Hello, my name is Serena Freet. SARENAFREET. I live in Lincoln.
Welcome.
Thank you. When thinking on what I wanted to share with you all today, and reviewing the budget with you all again, I really just thought about reading the names of all of the beautiful Black people that have been murdered by racist police this year in 2020. To hold space to collectively grieve and honor and remember them, each individual that makes up the 751 people that have been killed by racist police this year. But we as the community know how you all receive public comments and emails, oftentimes with fatigue and distractions. As Black folks have asked you to listen while making them relive and share their generational trauma, you still aren't listening. Prioritizing protection of the youth in our schools at the hands of the police shows you aren't listening. The harm that has been caused this summer by the orders of the mayor and by the hands of the police is not forgotten. You all are actively choosing to continue to harm and put greater risks on Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and disabled students. Racist police in schools harms our communities and strains the limited resources that are given to programming and relationship building that community learning centers offer. You all choose what is prioritized, what is given money. Now is the time to choose life-affirming community relationship building. Get cops out of schools, hire caring people that support our students, and expand the capacities of our community learning centers. The youth know that a police officer shot Jacob Blake was a school resource officer. With more money for community learning centers, they could offer more scholarships for youth to attend programming. They could update technology to support remote learning opportunities and basic job functions. They could increase capacity and expand what they are already doing, hiring more people, part-time, full-time, and also paying people a living wage that are doing this intensive care work and building relationships with our students and our community and their families. They could also offer adult education opportunities, more mental health and therapy support, prioritize more funding for proactive and preventative programming.
Thank you.
Is there a rule that I have to, can I take my mask off?
You can if you wish, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, next is, on deck is Kieran Wilson.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was told I was on deck.
No,
You're up.
you're
Oh,
up.
I'm okay.
Yes,
Oh.
on deck is Kieran Wilson.
I got it. All right, my name's Corey Raymond. I want to ask that the budget be maintained and the three legs of the stool, so to speak, continue to be funded as they were. You know, I don't know that I would have got by without the CLCs over this last 5 to 6 months as a single parent and having to work and pay the bills. If not for the CLC, my 9-year-old probably would have been stuck at home by himself, fending for himself. So I know I'm not the only one in that position. So I appreciate Lincoln and what you've done to help us out in that aspect. I don't have the knowledge to speak much of mental health, but I think everybody supports the mental health aspect of the city being involved. Regarding the school resource officers, I suspect, as I recall, I thought there was going to be I know there's a whole lot of data collected, and there was going to be a type of questionnaire that went out to the students and the parents and their attitudes of the school resource officer. I know that got thrown all amok because of the corona, so we might not have some of those numbers that we hope to. But this is so new, it would be great to see the attitude of the general public with the school resource officers, because I suspect the vast majority, not only do they support the police, they support the school resource officers. And they might not be as vocal as some of the recent folks that have been speaking, but I suspect they are just as sincere, that they appreciate the protection and the community involvement, the community policing that offers. You know, my 16-year-old, I know many of you have children. It's been a difficult year raising children with everything that's going on. And, you know, seeing that TV and the cops are bad and the cops are just going to shoot everybody and we got to stay away from the police because they murder everybody. That has an impact on a 15-year-old's brain. And when he and I had a conversation about it, I suggested the best thing that he could do is maybe go talk to the school resource officer and humanize that a little bit. And when I hear these speeches about how the police are looking out to murder people, I just think of the message that sends to the kids. You know, I keep bringing this up. You know, I coach 3rd and 4th grade boys. I don't want them to be scared of the police. I want them to see that face and appreciate that, not be scared when they see that. And I just think that the officers being in the schools offers something, gets beyond the noise, beyond the rhetoric, and each can humanize each other. You know, and I know of many times the resource officers weren't arresting people. I mean, heck, I know of what they would describe as a predator who was preying on underage girls at one of our local schools here in town. And the police department became aware of that, and they got a hold of the local school resource officer because they had the faces of the couple girls who were victims of this predator. And that resource officer helped solve that case and take that predator off the streets. And he's incarcerated for a long time right now. Could the case have been made without the resource officer? I suspect so, but I know that is the type of work. They're not running around trying to give kids marijuana tickets all day. And I would also say, if my 16-year-old is bringing weed to school, I want to know about that. And I don't mind the police busting my kid for bringing weed to school if he's 16 years old. And I don't know how the juvenile justice system became the bad guy out of this, but when we talk about the community policing and restorative justice, for 20 years I've been watching the restorative justice efforts of some great people in the juvenile justice system. And I don't have the patience to do it, but God bless all those folks over there, and God bless the police that work with the county attorney and the judges and the defense attorneys to try to get these kids back on track. So it's disappointing to me that the police have been, the way they've been portrayed and the way the juvenile justice system has been portrayed, because I don't understand it. And I know all those folks over there, they're not trying to lock people up. They're trying to get kids help and fulfill needs that they have. Anyway, I got to get to a deposition, so I better get going. But I ask that the funding for the resource officers be maintained, and I appreciate your folks' time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Raymond.
Next up is Kieran Wilson. On deck is Madeline Swope.
You guys are some of the most disappointing people that I've had the honor of meeting through this whole process. I just want to let you know that ahead of time.
Welcome, Mr. Wilson. I didn't get it.
I just wanted to make that point clear. It's nice to have you all here so that I could make that statement. It's ridiculous. And I find myself saying this word all the time, but it's because that's the best way I can think to describe it. I would really love to have you guys shoot me an email or something and explain to me what exactly it is about this that makes you think that it's okay for you to sacrifice these lives of these Black and Indigenous students to benefit the broader network in a way that we don't even have evidence of. I mean, because the way that this functions, right, the way that SROs function is we use this excuse of school shootings to say this is why we keep them in our schools, right? But if it was about school shootings, they wouldn't have to be doing marijuana investigations. They wouldn't have to be breaking up fights. They wouldn't have to be doing all these things that we were perfectly able to do prior to them being in our schools. So that's not the reason. That's not why you're doing this, you know? And then when you look at the things that they are doing, because, you know, you could say, oh, well, fights are dangerous. They're keeping kids safe from fights. You know, not only can teachers break up fights, you know, in Nebraska, teachers are immune if they have physical contact with students, you know, to end an altercation, like they're immune, and, you know, people are working to get rid of that. But for the time being, we know that's the case. And so we know these cops don't have to break up fights. And yet we still send them out there to do that. And what we're not acknowledging is that if a kid knows there's a police officer at his school and he wants to fight somebody, he can always just not fight him at school. I don't know if you went to a school where, you know, when you wanted to fight, you're like, hey, dude, like, let's meet up at Jamba Juice, or what's the smoothie place here? I don't even know what it's called.
Juice Stop.
Juice Stop. Let's meet up at Juice Stop, you know, at 3 o'clock, at 4 o'clock, and like we'll settle it there. So essentially you are pushing those fights outside of school. You know, you can look at your statistics and say, look how many fights we stopped. How many didn't you? How many didn't you stop by those decisions? You don't think about those things because you're comfortable. You are really comfortable with this concept, and that's scary. You know, I truly honestly believe that had the results of these reports shown that there was not a disproportionate impact to students of color, you would have been more afraid than the result that you got. You would have been afraid that these white students were being treated unfairly. I honestly believe that, because that is how comfortable we have grown with this system of oppression. And you are all oppressors, inherently oppressors. And I honestly don't even care to know how individuals voted on this, how they're going to vote on this, because at the end of the day, I, as a citizen of this country, am doing everything in my power, in my position, to stop this from happening to these kids, and you are not. A vote is not all you can do. You can do so much more. You could be marching out there. You know, you want to cast a vote? Come march with us the next night then. You don't care about these issues. And people keep trying to tell me that you do and that it's complex, but is it really? Is it really that complex? You know, explain to me how you value a human life. Explain to me how you ignore all these other alternative solutions and get this tunnel vision and decide, you know, the only way that we can keep these schools safe is if these Black and Indigenous students face injustice every single day. It's ridiculous. For what? For a school shooting that we don't even know is going to happen? For a school shooting that an officer might flee the school when it occurs? Is that really why? Or is it the vandalism? Is it the marijuana? What is it? You're creating a school system, a place where students are supposed to be empowered, a place where they're supposed to leave with something that they earned, you know, they worked for. They're supposed to overcome their struggles. And instead, you're just placing this massive roadblock. And not only is it a roadblock today and tomorrow, it's a roadblock 10 years from now. There are kids leaving that school with diplomas, and there are kids leaving the schools with criminal records. You know, and even kids that don't leave with criminal records, they're leaving with an experience that convinces them that the people who are supposed to be protecting them do not care about them. And I'm not talking about the police. I'm talking about y'all. I'm talking about the faculty at those schools that are making these kids have these interactions with police. Do you understand what I'm saying? You're enabling that system, and there's no excuse. Did you know that Philip Tran, the officer that is the SRO at Lincoln High School, was charged, not charged, sorry. He had a suit filed against him for what is called a rough ride. A rough ride is when a police officer doesn't properly restrain a detainee in the back seat and proceeds to drive recklessly to the point that that person is injured. The only reason that suit was dismissed was because he didn't file a tort claim with the city. So you have an officer working in a school that has assaulted a Black man, potentially. I mean, you know, the system didn't allow it, so we don't know. You know, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
That 1 minute, Angie?
Yeah,
Or-
It drives me crazy. Y'all didn't really give me a warning, but you know,
Yeah,
I'll just wrap it up. I mean, you know, if disproportionate policing is, if the disproportionate impact of policing is what it takes to keep white kids safe, if seeing their classmates slammed to the floor, if seeing their classmates, their Black and Indigenous classmates treated unfairly is what makes white kids comfortable with the police, then we have a serious problem. And y'all need to fix it.
We did not give you a 1 minute warning. Do you need one additional minute, Mr. Wilson? Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
We also, I'm sorry, didn't get where he is from. Mr. Wilson, are you from Lincoln or Florida?
You don't need to know.
Well, I think she has to record it, right?
It's fine.
You don't need it?
We don't need it now. Angie, who's next? Are there other testifiers? Excuse me.
Madeline Swope?
Madeline, are you here?
Wait, I'm from Lincoln. Can you say I'm from Lincoln? Because someone on Facebook said that I'm a paid protester. And can you please, I've been living in Lincoln for 6 years.
Mr. Wilson would like us to read in the record that he is a Lincoln resident for many years.
Thank you. And I was born here. But fix this problem. Come on, that's for real.
Madeline, are you available?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just coming in.
Hi. All right.
Welcome.
Oh, yes. My name's Madeline Swope, and I'm a Lincoln resident.
Welcome.
Thank you. So I think there's been ample time, opportunity over the summer, and you've known that there's a lot of concerns about SRO issues. And I also don't know how all of you are going to choose to vote. But I think that there should have been more research done before deciding to hire and train more officers, which is going to require additional funding. And that results in funding for other programs to be taken away. And the size of enrollment, access to mental services, and quality of education all contribute more significantly to the sense of safety for students. Additionally, an extremely low number of officers around the country have intervened in severely dangerous situations like school shootings. And I think there is lack of evidence to support that students feel more safe when there's an officer at school. Back to the conversation about cannabis and the person who is supportive of SROs saying he wants to know if his kids bring cannabis to school. How would an SRO be more effective, at intervening in that situation than a teacher? I mean, communicating with the parents. I just don't understand how that makes more sense. When it comes to de-escalating situations, I mean, caseworkers and social workers do a great job of that in programs. Daycare childhood centers around the city, or caseworkers for persons who have severe disabilities. So like my significant other, he does that. If he's called in the middle of the night or something and someone's feeling suicidal, he can go and he helps them. And he's done that multiple times and talks someone down, and he's responsible where he would have to take them to a hospital or something. But an SRO isn't more equipped to do that than well, maybe a teacher, or a counselor or social worker. So I just don't understand why there's so much emphasis, and then bringing them into middle schools. And actually, Kieran made a good point too about fights. I witnessed that many times. Students would go and have a fight off grounds, right after school, maybe across the street or something. So I don't think that an SRO being present is going to prevent it. It's not preventative. You do have to focus on more preventative measures, training for other teachers, but you really do need to have a really great, strong presence of counselors at schools. I mean, I believe everyone here probably cares about the well-being, the mental well-being of students. That's why you are voting for increased funding for that, I guess, as well. But I just don't understand when the school to prison pipeline disproportionately affects Black and Indigenous peoples and Latinx peoples. And in our state, more people are incarcerated for the rate of per population than in like every other country, and we're a state, except like Russia and the United States. So when you look at that, though, the school to prison pipeline, that is a key factor to how that's happening. And I don't know if you're unaware of that or you need to do some more research. I think some of you are aware of that. But I just don't understand after this whole summer how you haven't wanted to engage with the people protesting more about this or voicing their concern. And also give us the opportunity to articulate ourselves more, because everything is like so short notice and not accessible.
1 minute.
That's fine. But thank you, and yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Swope. Angela, do we have others signed up to testify?
I have no others signed up, and I did not receive any requests for Zoom.
I understand. I think someone is checking now to make sure. Let's
Make sure nobody's out there.
take a moment. Yes, please. You can just read your name into the record and sign afterwards. Just tell us who you are and.
Yeah, move here so the screen's not distracting me. Hi, my name is Mit Bavzar. I live in Lincoln. I lived here since 2013. And I just want to talk about something, not specifically to this, but just the
Welcome,
perception.
Ned. Yeah.
Oh, hey.
There was not a break there for me to say welcome. Keep going.
But just on perception, people's perception, and how people perceive law enforcement. And I want to give my perspective on this. And so my background, when I was 17 years old, I enlisted in the United States Army, and I was an infantry soldier. When I was 21 years old, I commissioned as an artillery officer. I've got 2 combat tours. I've received the Combat Action Badge. And so I want to talk a little bit about making split-second life or death decisions. I have looked another man through a rifle scope with the authority to take his life. And yeah, it is a decision that is a difficult decision to make. However, what was explained to us when we deployed was when you have that authority, it comes with a lot of responsibilities. And the responsibilities for us, before we pulled the trigger on a civilian in a combat zone, was that we had to have positive ID of a weapon and we had hostile intent. We came across a lot of Iraqi citizens that had weapons, but we could not engage them unless they were pointed at us because they weren't necessarily aggressive to us. They had a right to carry weapons, as do American citizens. That was the expectation of a 17-year-old kid that's had 6 weeks of basic training and 6 weeks of infantry school. We can hold them to that standard. Now, police are judged based on what a reasonable officer would do. That is the precedent established in Graham versus Connor. I've spoken to multiple law enforcement officers, including the captain of the Central Division here.
Center team.
Center team. I've talked to the head of the SWAT team and the head use of force trainer. Also, this was at a little roundtable discussion, one of their internal affairs guys. And I wanted them to establish something more than an officer can engage a citizen just based on his fear. I wanted them to say they would have an expectation that another cop would positively identify a weapon and hostile intent, something more than just he feared for his life. And I've not heard a single cop acknowledge that. That is why when I see a cop on the street, I'm in fear for my life, because I don't know when he's going to imagine something, when he's going to freak out for no reason and pull a gun and kill people. Now, statistically, that doesn't happen a lot. But the fact is, when it does happen, they get away with it, and people like you don't hold them accountable. It just doesn't happen. I still don't know who gave the order for the cops to fire on peaceful protesters, and no one has addressed that. And I don't expect you guys to hold them accountable. That is why people fear the cops. It's because you don't hold them accountable and because they don't hold themselves accountable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And signing in now. Thank you. And thank you for your service, too. Are there others, Angie, that would like to?
Sorry.
Have others signed in? Is there anyone else? Okay. Do I need to make any official action to close this public hearing?
Can you just close it?
I move we close the public hearing and go to our next agenda item.
Did you want to entertain a motion on the budget itself?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that would be great. I like the way she thinks. Now that we've had public hearing and we discussed the budget, I'd like to entertain a motion to adopt the budget, the 2021 budget. Mr. McGinnis, is your hand up?
Move we adopt the 2021 budget as presented to us today, as proposed.
I have a motion by Mr. McGinnis and a second by Mr. Mayhew.
Yep.
Is there discussion of this motion? Ms. Danick?
Some of us have been around long enough to remember when we put this interlocal agreement, this SSKI board together. It was a very different time in our country. It was a very different time in our city. We were trying desperately to make sure our community learning centers had a long-standing path to sustainability. It was to make sure that we addressed the mental health and emotional needs of our students. And it was to make sure parents felt their kids were safe. There isn't a person sitting up here that isn't appalled by police violence against a human being. It's unfair to say that we condone it, because we don't. And for someone who has family members who are law enforcement, who sat yesterday and listened to Officer Down and watch on a Facebook page where people were saying, "I hope he passes," made me sick to my stomach. So excuse me, there are two sides to every story. And we've heard both sides to the story. I went through our memorandum of understanding between the City of Lincoln and the Lincoln Police Department. And I did this because I really, really wanted us to understand what we were asking. And I read some of this the other night, but the training is so important because it's working with the psyche of the children that we serve. Each of us wants to know that the officer that interacts with the children in our buildings has had training on school-based law enforcement, focused on coursework on school law, student rights, understanding the special needs students with disabilities. I want to know that they know how to do conflict de-escalation techniques. I want to know that they understand ethics, the teenage brain development, adolescent behavior, implicit bias training, which everybody should go through, diversity and cultural awareness, trauma-informed responses, restorative justice practices, and preventing violence in school settings. I read these because these are in the memorandum of understanding between Lincoln Public Schools and the Lincoln Police Department. This is a responsibility to make sure the school resource officers and the administrative teams at each of the schools are trained to know who does discipline, when is it a law enforcement interaction, does the police officer go to the administration, does the administration come to him? One of the takeaways from the data was that instead of just anyone making recommendations, they were following the chain of command and going up through the administration. And I say that because I know teachers who worked tirelessly to use those mental health services that we were able to put in place to help students. So while I've heard a lot in public testimony, I can tell you I've also received testimony from citizens who didn't come to a meeting, who are grateful that we put our children's needs, all of our children's needs, at the forefront of the decisions we make. People might disagree. Reasonable people can disagree. But we have accountability in this memorandum of understanding as well. And the accountability is a huge piece. It's the data collection. I greatly appreciate the immense number of hours to get a report ready for us early. I know that report wasn't supposed to be delivered to us until October, and we'll have it again in October as this board. But we had two presentations of it, one through our subcommittee and then one as an entire board on the data. Nobody sugarcoated it. Nobody said it didn't happen. What we said is it's a job in progress and we're working on it. We didn't see any increases when we looked at the data. But the next data thing, we can see what can we do to make it better. Is the problem the interaction between having an SRO in there, or is it an interaction because there's an illegal activity going on? I can't whitewash selling drugs in school because my brother was addicted to drugs. Sorry, I can't. It changed his life forever. I can't whitewash assaulting someone, no matter where it is, whether it's in our school or in a park, and if the officer in school hears that it's at a park down the block, they're probably going to send somebody down there. At least that's what happened with what the kids are telling me. What I would challenge this board to do, because we are the city and the school district, is to, in the next couple of months, let's let's set up some meetings inside the neighborhoods we serve. And let's find a proactive way. You can't just come and complain unless you have an answer to a problem. You can't just come in and throw darts and say, well, it might happen here, even if you can't show it has. What you have to do is come and say, we're really making an effort to find a solution. Because I'm very proud of the men and women I know in the police department. I was grateful that they were at Hartley Elementary yesterday. I was grateful that my granddaughter was safe in that building because it kept a situation off campus from entering that building. I will be supporting this budget because I do believe there are 3 prongs to a school district: preventative, proactive, protective. And we do the education besides it all. Schools have to seem to do everything, and I'm grateful for this partnership because schools aren't having to do it all by themselves. Thank you. I will be voting for this budget.
Thank you, Ms. Danny. Mr. Mayhew?
I just wanted to respond to a couple of things that have been said, and this will mirror some of the comments that I gave at our school board meeting the other night. But first of all, I think it is a mistake to say that the data in the report shows a disproportionate effect on children of color due to the presence of the SROs. There is indeed a disproportionate effect on children of color, but what the data also shows is that 99% of the calls that resulted in citations came from teachers, administrators, parents, or students. Those calls would have happened regardless of whether the SROs were stationed at the school or whether we had had to make a call and gotten a street cop in responding to the issue. Some of the folks have suggested that the police are being used for discipline, and they're not. The teachers and administrators are still expected, and this was part of the work that went in, and all the research and the time and the conversations that went into the MOU 2 years ago, was to ensure that there was a very clear line of delineation that student discipline, student behavior is the responsibility of the teachers and the administrators. The presence of the police is to respond to criminal activity, and that's what's happening. In terms of benefits, to my mind, having the resource officers in the buildings, excuse me, we get the benefit of reduced response times. Of course, as has been mentioned, the SROs and our administrators have extra training relevant to their work as SROs with students, and also the benefit of building relationships and humanizing the SROs to our students. There have been several people who have come up and said, you're not listening to us, we're telling you what we think. And I think I can speak for everyone when I say we are listening to every word, we're reading every email, we're following all the conversations on Facebook, but we're also hearing from a lot of people besides the folks who are coming in and giving us the testimony, and there is a lot of feedback in favor of the SROs. And folks who've been here for a while remember when we removed the middle school SROs, I was one of the people who voted for that for some of the reasons that have been given. Over time, I've come to not regret that decision. I made the best decision I could with the information I had at the time, but recognizing how much our staff, our principals, and our students and families have come to value the work that the SROs do at the high schools and in the middle schools, and that's why I'm supportive of this. I completely believe in institutional racism. I think that is real. I acknowledge my privilege. I don't think that pulling the resource officers from the middle schools is the answer to the very real discomfort that folks are feeling. I don't yet know what the answer is. I do believe that there are a bunch of people who don't look like me who have different feelings or experiences with law enforcement. It is completely valid, and I think we need to find out more about it. I think we have our work cut out for us. I think we need to do more to capture more data, to do more outreach, to gather more feedback. I know we've got some time to do that before January, when we'll be voting on the MOU, I believe, renewal of the MOU. And so I would urge us to do that. Again, I don't know what form that takes, but I do think we need to keep the lines of communication open with people who are clearly very invested. We need to keep getting that information back, and that can inform our future decisions. I'm voting in favor of this budget. I do believe that the SROs are a huge benefit to our teachers and families. I also recognize that there are still people who don't feel comfortable, and we can't let that be forgotten. We still have to address that. And so I think that work is in front of us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayhew. Ms. Duncan?
Okay, I'll go ahead and go. Many of you know, and I wasn't sure if, Richard probably knows this, and Benny, I'm not sure if you know this, I live and breathe CLCs. They're my deal. Richard's laughing. I won't look at Nola because she's probably saying, don't bother me anymore.
We've had that conversation.
I spent the morning working with a nonprofit trying to get them air conditioning. So I live and breathe that. And I live and breathe the mental health therapy. I live and breathe that. But I didn't live and breathe the SROs. And I didn't know everything that they did. So I called our middle schools and I called our high schools. I talked to our administration. I said, tell me your stories. I started it out with just tell me about your SRO. Here's some of the responses that they gave me. Please don't take them away. They eat lunch with their students and form powerful relationships simply over chicken nuggets. He helps me with recess and actually just plays basketball with my students. I think he's having a little more fun than I am during recess. If I didn't have her, and there was a fight at our school that I could not control, I would need to call the police, and I might get an officer that does not know my students or may not like my kids. Then you tell me what happens. This morning, the SRO talked to me about one of our students that was a witness to his mom going to jail last night and will be late to school this morning. She asked if she could spend a few minutes with this student and had tears in her eyes. These situations are just as hard on her as they are on our staff. My SRO presents in all of our career classes, health classes, and science classes. He really makes an effort to get to know my students. And I also asked some of our parents that are friends of mine what they thought of their SROs. One of the mothers I spoke with, 2 of her sons played football for UNL. They've been in some of our videos, a wonderful family that really understands our community. She said, if you get the officer I had, they will know all 1,800 students by name. It's amazing. So I will be voting for this budget because I believe in all 3 parts of it. I, however, believe also that we have 60 days in which if something is not going right, we can stop this agreement. And I will lean on that if I don't see improvement, I don't see discussions in the community, and I don't see us all working together. I know we will. I know that between all of us, we can work together and get in the community and see what's going on. So I will vote in favor.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. Mr. McGinnis? If nothing, I would like to say a little something.
Everybody's a lot smarter than I am, especially up here.
First, I'd like to say, I should have said earlier, thank you for those that came forward and testified. As Mr. Mayhew and Ms. Danik and everyone else here said, I received lots of emails and phone calls from members of the community, some who were opposed to the idea of SROs, many who were supportive of the idea of SROs. The diversity among ideas and support is greater than you'd believe. We do hear you, both in support and opposition. We hear you, and we talk about that, and we're concerned about that. We want this to be, as our title, safe and successful kids, so we're working as hard as we can to get that. The data will help inform our decisions in the next few months. We know there's structural inequality and systemic racism in our society, which does lead into our school systems, and we're going to do everything we can to address that and make it a successful school system for every student in Lincoln Public School System. The city is committed to that, the public school board is committed to that, and that's what we're going to do. And I think this budget is a step in that direction. If there's nothing else to say, I think we're ready to vote. I would like Ms. Chestnut to call the roll, please.
Okay. I just want to confirm, motion was made by McGinnis and seconded by Mayhew?
Yes,
Okay,
that's the way I
thank
remember it,
you.
yeah.
Kathy Danik?
Yes.
Connie Duncan?
Yes.
Don Mayhew?
Yes.
Richard McGinnis?
Yes.
Benny Shope?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you. Thank you again for everyone who participated, and now we start again for the next time around. But for today, we're going to go to the election of the 2021 officers for this interlocal board. And I'm going to just read it. Secretary of the Interlocal Board, Parks and Rec, and the treasurer from the city and the finance department. There's nice words here, but basically, we need to talk about opening the floor to nominations for the chair and vice chair for the 2021 school year. I will entertain motions for nominations for chair of this board. Does anyone like to nominate anyone?
Sure.
I'm sorry, look up every now and then. Yeah, bad chairing on my part. Maybe it's time
I would like to nominate Ms. Kathy Danick for president, chair of our board.
Chair of our board. I'd like to have a second, please. Second for Mr. Mayhew. There's a motion and second that Kathy Danick serve as chair of this interlocal board for the next year. Is there any discussion of that motion? Hearing no discussion, I'd like you to call the roll, please.
Okay. Kathy Danick?
Yes.
Connie Duncan?
Yes.
Don Mayhew?
Yes.
Richard McGinnis?
Yes.
Benny Shope?
Yes, Mr. McGinnis likes that delayed drama aspect of it. Thank you very much. Ms. Danick, congratulations. You will serve as our chair for next year.
Thank you.
My next job as the current chair is to open the floor for nominations for vice chair. Traditionally, since this is a city and a school board, the chair serves from one body and the vice chair from another body. So I'll entertain, Mr. Mayhew, I'll entertain your motion.
I would nominate Benny Shobe to be our vice president for the next year.
Second?
We have a motion by Mr. Mayhew and a second by Mr. McGinnis that I serve as the vice chair for the next calendar year. Is there any discussion of that motion for the next fiscal year, isn't it? It's not really. No discussion of that motion? Ms. Chestnut, would you call the roll, please?
Okay. Kathy Danick?
Yes.
Connie Duncan?
Yes.
Don Mayhew?
Yes.
Richard McGinnis?
Yes.
Benny Shope?
Yes. Thank you. I will do my best.
And I guess I get to take over now.
It works for me. Works for you.
So let me start with thank you, Benny, for the way you've led us through this pandemic. It's kind of made everything kind of a crazy year, and we're greatly appreciative. Could we please give Benny a hand?
Thank you. It was fun to work with you. Now we got some more work to do.
So you have before you on the next agenda item is our meeting schedule. You have a document like this in the printed work. It's also new. Our meeting schedule for the rest of the year, November 20th, the second Thursday, November 12th. January 21 is the January of 2021. It's the fourth Thursday, January 28th. March would be the fourth Thursday, March 25th. April would be the fourth Thursday on April 22nd, and August would be the fourth Thursday of August 2021. Just want you to note that when this interlocal board was put together, the one board that we do the budget in April, we have that as a 6:30 to 7:30 meeting. All other meetings are 12:15 to 1:15. And it should be noted that we also had an agreement that when LPS is in charge of this interlocal, the meetings will be hosted by LPS, so this frees up your chamber council room for a year.
Other activities.
There you go. So I would entertain a motion to adopt the meeting schedule.
So moved.
Moved by McGinnis. Is there a second?
Second.
A second by Connie Duncan. Is there discussion on those meeting dates? Seeing none. Angela, would you please call the roll?
Kathy Danick?
Yes.
Connie Duncan?
Yes.
Don Mayhew?
Yes.
Richard McGinnis?
Yes.
Benny Shope?
Yes.
And moving on, we have the review of the annual report on mental health services. Is Dr. John Neal and Russ Ewing, please? Welcome, gentlemen. Oh, and Ms. Hendrick. Yes, sir.
You read that.
Thank you.
Want to trade chairs?
I'm just technical support.
I'm good here. I'd have to move my phone.
Yeah, no.
Oh, no, I'm just looking for
a relief and weird at the same time.
Exactly. You also have a PowerPoint handout on this in your paperwork.
Do you want us to wait till Mr. McGinnis gets back?
No, he said he had to take a phone call. Go ahead, he'll catch up.
Okay, all right, thanks for having us share some information with you today. Alison and I are going to talk about some of the mental health supports that are provided through the interlocal agreement. Alison is going to touch on the threat assessment supports that we provide, and then I will talk about our community mental health partners and the increased support that the interlocal has helped us provide in funding for that.
Like Ross said, my name is Alison Hendrick. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and my title through LPS is safety social worker. That role serves two different purposes. I'm a social worker on the threat assessment team, but I also help with the integration of our school mental health services in with our behavioral health support, our behavior supports within the school, to try to integrate the two systems to make this continuum of services that includes therapy. So my role as a safety social worker and on the threat assessment team, after the initial investigation, I work with the schools on safety planning and case management, which includes referrals to the community. I then monitor that plan over time and help support that school, the students, or families, depending upon the needs in that situation, with continuing that plan over time. Because as we know, things happen, and sometimes that continuity of care is what actually helps decrease that risk over time. My counterpart on the team is our behavioral health therapist, and I want to highlight her role on our team specifically because of the interlocal funds, we've been able to have a lot of success with the use of this therapist and with students. So her identified role is to address the risk factors that led to the concerning behavior in the first place through therapy. Because of the interlocal funds, we are able to be more flexible with the use of her therapy services, and so she is a mobile therapist. So she goes to where that student is, no matter what building they go to school in. Additionally, we are able to be flexible with the frequency and intensity of her services so that she can see students more than one time a week. She can work with the family. She can do some case management aspects, so make referrals, collaborate with different services. And so we're able to, like I said, be more flexible with our services in order to meet the student's need rather than try to fit them into this therapy model service when we know that in cases where there's a safety concern, flexibility is required. An overview of what threat assessment team looks at. Our primary function is to assess and manage targeted violence risk. However, our priority is to connect people with resources and intervene through services in order to change outcomes for students and families, give them that opportunity that maybe they didn't have before. Some team outcomes that we had this last school year is our team was able to train 550 staff on targeted violence, the risks factors to look for, but not just identifying students, but how to help them afterwards, and that includes that safety planning process, not just the physical aspect of safety planning, but the psychological aspects. That's what are we gonna do to help change the thinking and help manage the emotions that led to that safety concern behavior in the first place. And so it includes both aspects of that, and how do we do that? We also produced an educational video to show to staff to increase visibility of ourselves within the district, so they know they can use us as a resource, as a partner to help address any concerns that they have in their school. Throughout the last year, we saw an increase of 40% in our referrals to our team, which we saw as a result of our increased visibility, but also it indicates a concern, or it indicates that administrators were able to identify safety concerns and be more preventative and proactive by reaching out and helping us get them services for their students that they had concerned about before there was a situation. Additionally, we were able to increase our behavioral health supports through that therapist by 65%. And again, speaks to the flexibility. We were able to identify gaps in our behavioral health needs in our district and then fill those gaps with that therapist. So again, not only the flexibility on the frequency intensity, even in the flexibility in the type of service, whether that be an evaluation to initiate services or that be ongoing therapy. And we, of course, remained operational during our building closure and maintained communication and referrals to therapy, and everything was functional. And then additionally, our proposal to our National Association of Threat Assessment Professionals was accepted for presentation at the national conference on the model that we're using in LPS, which is pretty exciting to be able to go and share how we're managing safety concerns. I wanted to just also highlight that this is just an example of how our team may intervene in a situation. We get a referral. In this situation, we got it from a behavioral health therapist, the community partner that's in our school, and they contacted our team. So then we identified that if it was right before summer, there was going to be some concerns if services were going to be stopped. Our team was able to come in and assist in this situation. First, the question we ask is this a targeted violence risk? And that after that, we can still continue to help even if the answer is no. And that's the uniqueness about this interlocal agreement, is that we are here to help manage targeted violence risk, but because of the mental health resources, we're able to help anyways, even if the answer is not yes. And so we're able to then plug in that therapist to work over the summer with that family, so those safety concerns do not become an issue because there's not a loss of service. The partnership with our administrators is highlighted through them and securing summer school placement for that student, and then that administrator also worked with the CLC, which is again that third prong of the agreement, to show the layers of support, so that student was then having those enrichment activities. All of this was able to be done at no cost to the family because of the interlocal agreement. Safe to Say is a application that we have available for non-emergency safety concern reporting, and it allows for anonymous reports if someone would like to make an identification of a safety concern in our school buildings.
So I'm going to highlight some of the mental health services that are provided through the interlocal agreement. We have 3 great community partners: Family Service, Blue Valley Behavioral Health, and Hope Spoke, that we partner with and had partnered with prior to the interlocal agreement. There's various funding sources within our district to provide these supports within our schools, but the funding provided by the interlocal agreement has had additional 4 schools through Hope Spoke, 6 through Family Service, and last year was 13 through Blue Valley, and this year will be 18. With that, we will be able to have, with all of the different funding sources, this year we have mental health supports, community mental health supports in every one of our buildings with the exception of 2 elementary schools. Now, Blue Valley's form of support is a little different than the other 2 in that they look at short-term problem solving, and so they'll look at working with students from 6 to 10 sessions. And along with the school supports that are provided, generally they're able to get the student back on the right path, that they can be manage their emotions and address their mental health concerns, etc., with those supports. But if they need more, they work with the school social worker and the Blue Valley therapist to work with the family on providing some of those more long-term supports. You've seen this triangle before. It's our MTSS multi-tiered system of support for behavior. The reason that I show it is that Alison gave an example of how we use these supports for all of our students, and she gave an example of a student that the threat assessment team had worked with. Therapy is also part of the continuum of supports, and generally is Tier 2. If it's with an individual student, it's with Tier 3. I also want to talk about our own LPS mental health supports. Now, these aren't part of the interlocal agreement, but our Board of Education and our executive team a number of years ago recognized the increased need for behavioral and mental health supports. And when we talk about that, we're primarily talking about our school counselors, our school social workers, and our school psychologists. And you can see from this graph how in that time the commitment to increasing our personnel in social workers, in school, elementary school counselors, and school psychologists. We now have elementary counselors in 22, more than half of our elementary schools, up from 5 a few years ago. And we have, during this time frame, almost doubled the number of school social workers and school psychologists. So, candidates for school-based therapy, as we had mentioned, are those that are already receiving school supports, but they are still struggling in some of their life factors that's impacting not only school, but their home life and possibly their social life. So we've got some data here that I'll go over, and these are just the number of schools served in some of these. I'm going to kick ahead a little bit in the interest of time, and I'm going to go to this graph that shows last year versus this year. So earlier, John Neal had mentioned about the fact that, last year, through most of the first quarter, we were working on getting the mental health supports. And so we really operated under 3 quarters last year, and then this last year, because of the pandemic, operated under 3 quarters. So these are pretty comparative, and you can see that we were able to serve more students this year. The next 2 pieces of data is, the first one is going to be a survey that we had done with our school social workers, our counselors, and our APs and coordinators, just about the mental health services that they are receiving in their building from our community partners. So you'll see in every one of these slides more than 90% of the responses are in the top areas. First one is, how would you rate your collaboration with a therapist? And then it is, were you able to get the students into therapy in a timely manner, which is very important. What about the feedback? We work very hard on partnering with the therapist to support the student. And that becomes really crucial so that within that partnership, you can support the family and the student in a joint, more comprehensive way. And then if this is one that, do you want to continue their therapy services within your school? And 100% have said yes. The other thing that we do is we do kind of a pre and post test with our students that have been in therapy. And it's called the Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire, or the SDQ. And you kind of have an idea of some of the questions that were on it. So within that, it measures student at high risk, medium risk, and low risk. These next 2 slides are going to be those where the student had completed therapy prior to the closing of school in March. So this is 76 students, and you can see that the difference in the pre and post test went down, which is a good thing, because what it's saying is that there were less high-risk students in these areas. And then in the next one is the students in low risk, and those have gone up. So what that means is that we have less students that are at high risk, more students that are at a lower risk. Okay? The next few slides are on those that were done after the school closing. And this involves about 100 and close to 140 students. And in this, you'll see a little bit different pattern. So the number of high-risk students on any disorder went up, emotional went down, and behavioral disorder went up, okay? Which is the opposite of what happened with those that were completed prior to the pandemic. Now, we don't know the exact reasons, but we feel pretty strongly that the reason is the pandemic added extra stress to the students. And so then the next one is dealing with those with low risk, and you can see that some of those had gone up and a few had gone down. And so we wanted to really separate those out that were completed pre-pandemic and those that were done post-pandemic. The other thing is that we worked with our partners on providing telehealth to students, and in many cases, telehealth therapy was able to continue even though students were home there in the 4th quarter. And some of that will continue this school year depending upon what the situation of the student is. And then finally, we like to always share some success stories, and so the last or the next couple slides deal with those. And those are always those that we like to see, but it comes from our community therapists, it comes from our social workers, it comes from our administrators in the school to show not only their appreciation, but how it's impacting the student in their daily life. Each year we set some goals. Some of these are similar to what we had last year, is to continue that integration between therapy and school supports, continue to improve outcomes, and student and family engagement in our telehealth services where that's needed. So that is the end of our presentation, and would be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
I don't have a question. That's the first time I've ever seen a pie chart that was 100%. It was a whole pie.
Your pies don't end up, didn't
No, my pies are never that much. There you go. Any questions? Benny?
Thank you, Madam. Stupid button. Thank you, Madam Chair. Did I see in the budget there's a 4-point-something% increase in funding to what you guys are doing, or did I read that wrong?
There is an increase in our funding for mental health services, and John can address that if you want that addressed.
You said how many schools you were in, all but just a small number. It sounds like you're reaching capacity, or do you have room to expand is what I'm really... What are you going to do? What's your plans to expand over there?
So with that, what we've done is we've put the Blue Valley Behavioral Health, who does the shorter term, we put that in 5 additional schools that did not have a therapist in their building prior to.
Okay, that was my question. I like the idea of expanding. Thank you.
Connie?
I just have one thing, and I guess it's just a compliment to Allison, and maybe you can pass this compliment on. During the pandemic, when we were handing out food at some of our sites, I'm never going to forget this because it's happened every week. One of the kitchen staff said, okay, I'm going to put these 8 lunches aside because one of the therapists is coming to get these, and she's delivering them to the homes, and she did it every week. And she didn't have to do that.
Yeah, that is the really unique opportunity we have. Is not only it speaks to her as a therapist, but it also speaks to the different roles that she can play in a family's life, because it's not bound by insurance billing when it comes down to it. We can have that flexibility, and it's really a unique opportunity.
We all loved it, and half the kitchen staff would stuff a few more things in there.
Appreciate that.
So it was wonderful.
Any other questions?
Okay, thank you.
You're not normally that quiet. Thank you so much. Great job. With that, I have no other business to bring before this board. I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Richard?
I move that we adjourn.
Second?
Don? It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn this meeting. Our next meeting will be November 12th, 2020 at 12:15 at the LPS boardroom. And Angela, would you call the roll, please?
Yes. Kathy?
Yes.
Connie?
Yes?
Don?
Yes.
Yes.
And Benny?
Yes.
And this meeting is adjourned.